I worked the overnight shift at that storage facility for nearly 2 years, and in all that time only one memory still makes me check over my shoulder whenever I hear a certain old song. I was 24 years old when I took that job back in 2019. It was an easy gig mostly. Nights were long and quiet, perfect for someone like me who valued alone time and a steady paycheck. My main responsibilities were to just sit in the little office, monitor the security cameras, and patrol the grounds every few hours. It was a big facility, about 5 acres, with maybe 200 units, all laid out in neat rows like some tiny industrial neighborhood. My apartment was a small place on the edge of town, just a 15-minute drive down Highway 9. Most nights I would listen to podcasts, scroll on my phone, or sometimes even do some online classes when things were really slow. It was the kind of job people forget about, that humble, unassuming kind of work that just exists. The facility itself wasn't fancy. Just a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, a small office building by the gate, and then endless rows of those gray metal doors. The only lights were the ones on the corners of the buildings, casting long, strange shadows across the asphalt as the night wore on. It was never truly dark out there, but also never truly bright. Just a perpetual twilight under the artificial glow. The air usually smelled like damp concrete and a faint metallic tang from the rolling doors. Sometimes it would smell like old boxes and dust if I was patrolling near an outdoor unit that had been recently opened. My rounds were pretty straightforward. Every 3 hours, I would grab my heavy-duty maglite flashlight, the one you could practically bludgeon someone with, and walk the perimeter. I'd check all the locks, make sure no one had breached the fence, and just generally be a visible presence, even if no one was ever actually there to see me. It was mostly for legal reasons if something went wrong, having proof that someone had done their job. The facility had been there for ages, probably since the 1970s, and most of the tenants were long-term. People who store things and then sort of forget about them, or maybe they just keep them for sentimentality. Unit 214 was one of those. It was a standard 10 by 10 unit right in the middle of Block B, tucked away from the main road. The paperwork for it was old, yellowed, and kept in a separate file because of its unusual history. It had been rented and paid cash for 30 years, almost since the place opened. 30 full years. No automatic payments, no credit card on file, just a steady stream of cash payments, always on time, always in a plain, unmarked envelope mailed to the main office. There was never an address for the renter, just a post office box in a town about an hour away. No name, just an initial, an F I think, written in a shaky, old-fashioned script. No one had ever opened that unit. The manager, a gruff woman named Susan who'd been there even longer than the unit had been rented, often joked that whatever was in there must be gold. She said she'd never even seen the renter, or rather the person who was making the payments. It was all a mystery, but not a particularly interesting one, just a quirky detail of the job. The first winter I worked there, which was the winter of 2019 going into 2020, was when I first heard it. It was a cold night, one of those clear, crisp nights where the stars seem impossibly bright and the air bites at your exposed skin. I was doing my 3 year patrol. The gravel crunched under my boots, a familiar sound that usually faded into the background. My breath plumed out in front of me in white clouds. I remember I had my big flashlight pointed at the ground, just scanning for debris or anything out of place. That's when the humming started. It was faint at first, barely perceptible over the rustle of the wind and the distant hum of the highway. A low, melodic sound, like someone quietly singing to themselves. I stopped. My head tilted, listening. I clicked off my flashlight, plunged into the deeper gloom between the building rows to really focus. It was definitely there, a lullaby, like a child's lullaby, or maybe a very old woman's. The tune was slow, repetitive, and had this melancholic quality to it. It sounded like it was coming from one of the units around Block B. My first thought was that it had to be a radio. Maybe a homeless person had broken in and was trying to stay warm. It happened sometimes, especially in the colder months. People seeking shelter. It was an annoying but understandable occurrence. So I started walking towards the sound, trying to pinpoint which unit it was. The humming continued, steady and unwavering. As I got closer, I realized it was coming from Unit 214. I stopped about 10 feet away from the door. The sound was clearer now, a human voice, definitely a woman's. The tune was unfamiliar to me, but it had that universal quality of a soothing song meant for a child. There was no light under the door, no sign of forced entry. The lock was untouched. I leaned in, putting my ear against the cold metal door. The humming was distinct now. It felt like it was coming from directly inside, not echoing from some distant point. It was so close, it was uncanny. I stood there for a few minutes, just listening, feeling a bit confused. I knocked, a firm rap on the metal. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. "Hello, is anyone in there?" The humming stopped, just like that. Mid-note. The silence that followed was abrupt and total. I waited, nothing. I knocked again. Hello? Still nothing. I tried the handle, but it was locked solid as expected. I stood there for a good 10 minutes trying to figure out what was going on. I even walked around to the back of the unit, checking the wall for any unusual vents or openings that could explain the sound carrying from somewhere else. But it was just a solid metal wall. I went back to the office, reviewed the camera footage for that section of the facility. Nothing. No one had entered or exited the block. No cars had come or gone around 214. No lights in the area blinked or flickered. It was completely normal. I even zoomed in on the specific unit door, but it was just a static image of a metal door. Or maybe my mind playing tricks on me in the cold. I had been up since 6 EMEA the day before, and it was 4 EMEA now. Sleep deprivation could do weird things. Perhaps a car had driven by with their stereo on, and the sound bounced off the buildings in just the right way. It was a bit of a stretch, but it was the most logical explanation I could come up with. I wrote it off as a peculiar incident, just one of those strange things that happen when you work alone in the middle of the night. The next winter, 2020 going into 2021, the humming started again. It was early December, another cold night. I was on patrol, same 3 EMEA round, same block B. The air was still, no wind this time, and there it was, the same soft, mournful lullaby, again coming from Unit 214. This time I wasn't surprised. I actually felt a weird sense of recognition, almost like it was an old acquaintance. I walked straight to the unit. The humming was just as clear, just as steady. It was the same tune. I didn't knock this time. I just leaned my ear against the door again, listening closely. It truly sounded like someone was right on the other side, softly singing. There was no quality of an echo, no muffling. It was clear and present. I spent probably 20 minutes just listening. The lullaby continued without interruption. I tried to discern words, but it was just humming, a wordless melody. The thought of a radio no longer seemed plausible. A radio wouldn't play the same exact humming lullaby for 30 minutes straight, especially not one that sounded so organic, so human. And it certainly wouldn't have been audible from inside a locked, sealed unit. I imagined a little old lady humming herself to sleep, or perhaps humming to some doll or object she had stored in there. But Unit 214 was never opened. The manager confirmed it again. No one had been in or out for decades. I went back to the office, pulled up the camera footage for the last few patrols. Nothing, just the usual empty aisles. I even checked the thermal cameras we had installed just that year. Nothing. No heat signature inside the unit. Not even a faint one that would suggest a person or even a small animal. It was completely cold. That's when a chill, unrelated to the outside temperature, went up my spine. I didn't tell anyone about it. Who would believe me? I could almost hear Susan's sarcastic reply in my head. "Sure, Alex, a ghost is humming Irish folk songs in Storage Unit 214. Get some sleep, kid." I started timing my patrols so I wouldn't be near Block B during the 3 EMEA round in winter. It felt cowardly, but it also felt practical. I wasn't getting paid enough to investigate spectral lullabies. Winter of 2020, 1 to 2020, 2 was the same. The humming started in December, always around 3 EMEA, always from Unit 214, always the same, melancholic lullaby. I never heard it during my other patrol times, only that one. It was consistent like clockwork. I grew to recognize the tune. It was pretty, in a haunting way. Sometimes, if I was checking the units in Block A, I would hear it faintly carried on the wind, a ghostly whisper across the silent facility. My rational mind, which I prided myself on, started working overtime. Maybe there was a vent system I didn't know about. a peculiarity in the building's construction that acted like a giant resonator carrying sound from far away. But from where? There were only more storage units stretching out for acres. Could it be a vibrating pipe? But it was a vocal hum, not a mechanical drone. I tried to find a logical explanation, but each one felt weaker than the last. I started to resent the humming, not for being frightening, but for being inexplicable. It chipped away at my ordinary, predictable world. Last night was the night it truly became unsettling. This is the winter of 2022 into 2023, my fourth winter at the storage facility. The humming had been going on for about 2 weeks already, and I had been doing my usual avoidance tactics, scheduling my break during the time I knew it would start. But last night I was running late. A new system update had taken longer than expected, and my patrol was delayed. It was almost 3:30 ME when I finally made it to Block B. The wind was whipping through the facility, carrying the scent of impending snow. I was hurrying, wanting to get back to the warmth of the office, and then I heard it. The lullaby, clearer than ever even over the wind, almost like it was right outside my ear. I stopped. The humming continued. I could almost make out a tremor in the voice, a slight vibrato that spoke of age or perhaps immense sadness. The cadence and the gentle rise and fall of the tune were incredibly distinct. It was like I was listening to someone singing right in front of me. I looked at Unit 214. The metal door seemed to absorb the dim light, appearing darker than the surrounding units. I was maybe 20 feet away when it happened. The humming stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It stopped mid-note, abruptly, like a recording device had been switched off, or a singer had simply ceased breathing. The silence was instantaneous, profound, and utterly chilling. The wind seemed to die down at the same moment, leaving an unnatural stillness in the air. And then I heard it. A soft sound, polite, almost tentative. 3 distinct knocks. Tap, tap, tap. It came from inside Unit 214. It wasn't a loud bang, not a desperate pounding. It was a gentle, almost inquiring knock, like someone asking to be let out. My heart hammered in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen in place, my big mag light hanging uselessly at my side. It was just a metal door, unmoving, silent again. I waited, for another knock, for another hum, for anything. But there was nothing, just the silence and the growing cold. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, trying to find any explanation, a rat, a large bug, but the knocks were too deliberate, too organized, 3 of them, perfectly spaced. It wasn't random. It was a signal. For the first time I felt a genuine, stomach-dropping fear. It wasn't the irrational fear of a ghost, but the primal fear that something utterly impossible had just occurred, right in front of me, in my predictable, mundane world. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead. I just slowly, carefully, backed away. I walked backward to the end of the aisle, then slowly turned and made my way back to the office, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly with each uncertain step. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist. Every creak of the empty unit sounded like a footstep behind me. I spent the rest of the night in the office, huddled in my chair, staring at the monitors. I reviewed the footage again. Nothing. The camera showed a perfectly still, perfectly empty Block B. No one had been in the aisle. Nothing out of the ordinary. The thermal camera showed the unit as completely cold, just as it had for years. When Susan came in at 8 m, I just told her I wasn't feeling well and went home. I haven't been back since. I called her later that day and quit. She sounded annoyed, but she didn't try to talk me out of it much. I told her I found a better paying job. That wasn't a lie, not exactly. Any job where I didn't question my sanity would be better paying to me. I drive a different way to work now.